These women elders have experienced all the medicines in all levels of dosages. That's a lot of traveling in these other realms. They actually know the territory and can intuit where the person is. They've been there. That's very different from maybe having a couple of MDMA sessions or a few ketamine sessions or maybe even one mushroom session. They did their own healing using these medicines.
Welcome to Modern Psychedelics, where we explore the transformations made possible through intentional engagement with psychedelics. This podcast will help you integrate high consciousness living into the everyday and deepen the work ignited by altered states. You can expect balanced and grounded conversations around therapeutic, ceremonial, and recreational containers. My name is Lana Pribick, your host and guide. I am a 3-time certified professional life coach, and I work with people who want to integrate higher levels of consciousness into their daily lives so they can feel more peace, fulfillment, and connection. After all, our time here on Earth is so brief, so let's make sure we're really living. The song you hear is called Lost Horizon by Peace Sign. All right, let's journey. Hello, and welcome. It is so nice to have you here. I have such a beautiful guest for you guys to enjoy today. Dr. Rachel Harris is actually a returning guest. I interviewed her in season 1 of the podcast about 2 years ago, and she is back and better than ever with her new book, Swimming in the Sacred: Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground. Now, I say this in her interview, and I want to say it to you guys right here, right now, that I think that this is one of the most important books on psychedelics that have come out in the recent years, and maybe even of all time. It is just so important that people who are interested in psychedelics check out this book and the wisdom that is shared in it. Dr. Rachel Harris took several years to interview about 20 underground psychedelic guides, and her criteria was that they have at least 20 years of research, making them elders in the space. I am a huge supporter of the underground and of all things underground. As you guys know, I love rave culture. I really love the underground. I think that it's so special. And I'm so happy that this book has been written because the psychedelic industry is really taking the world by storm right now. And I think that what the mainstream psychedelic, industry is missing is this wisdom that is shared in this book, the wisdom that underground guides have to share who have been working with various medicines for much longer than researchers at universities have. And of course, both things have their place. But part of what I am so passionate about on my platform is actually shining a light on some of the underground work that is being done, some of the more traditional work that's connected to direct lineages, and just some of the stuff that isn't so spoken about. And Dr. Rachel Harris's book does such an amazing job of highlighting that. I read it all in just about a week, which is very fast for me, and I highly recommend that you pick up a copy. She was also kind enough to donate a book for us to do a giveaway, so stay tuned until the end of the episode where I will announce how you can enter a giveaway for this book, and that giveaway link will also be in the show notes, and we will run that for a week after this episode airs. We talk a lot about the differences between transformation and the therapeutic process in this episode, which is really powerful because the guides that Dr. Rachel Harris interviewed are concerned with transformation, whereas Dr. Rachel Harris, she has been a therapist for many years. So it's very interesting to have her world collide with the world of the guides who are very interested with the process of transformation. We talked about how underground guides transition from doing their own healing to guiding, and the utter importance of doing one's own healing work before even considering being a guide or a facilitator. We talk about the differences between underground guides and psychedelic therapists. It's a completely different process. We talk about how underground guides view integration and what they look for. We talk about psychedelics and plant medicine as a way of life and how these women elders of the Psychedelic Underground have really made psychedelics and plant medicine a way of life for themselves and the sacrifices that they've made in order to do that. We talk about navigating the subtle realms and expanded states of consciousness, the quality of fearlessness in psychedelic guides, and how to be aware of ego inflation as a psychedelic guide. I think that this episode is really important for people who are trying to decide which kind of container and capacity to work with medicine in, especially those who are curious about, the inner workings of the underground. And then also, I think it's important for, people like myself who are considering moving into the role of facilitation and guiding. Now that I do feel that most of my healing journey is complete, it was really interesting for me to hear Dr. Rachel Harris talk about kind of the realities of what it means to do this type of work and the sacrifices that must be made and the trajectory that these women's lives have gone through. So I hope that you enjoy this episode. Don't forget that there will be a giveaway, so make sure you enter that. And I will catch you on the other side. Footwear has always been a huge issue for me. The problem is I want to look cute, but I'm also so over those fashion shoes that make my feet hurt and my bunions worse. Earth runners have solved all of my soul's problems. Their earthing sandals are not only comfortable, not only mimic barefoot living, but also look pretty damn cute with all my outfits. I recently got a pair for my 6 weeks in Costa Rica, and I am not kidding you guys. I did not take these shoes off. They were the only footwear that I brought with me other than my hiking boots, but honestly, I could have left those hiking boots at home. My feet feel like they're finally starting to heal after all of the damage I've put them through over the years. I can walk for long distances and my feet just don't hurt like they used to. I am obsessed. I have found my shoe for life. Made with Vibram outsoles for a responsive, sure-footed experience, these smart sandals are appropriate for hiking, long-distance running, not that I do any of that, water adventures, festivaling, I definitely do that, and integrating with the earth. So the stainless steel copper earthing system grounds you to the Earth's electromagnetic frequencies, which has a number of health benefits. You guys can research this: reducing inflammation, connecting to the circadian rhythm, better sleep, pain reduction, and some other stuff. The ultimate integration for me is living in alignment with the earth. And I love any products that help me do that. Free your feet and rewild your soul with Earth Runners. Just go and get a pair for the summer season and you will thank me later. I'm currently sporting the Circadian Adventure model and I'm about to go grab another pair because I'm that obsessed. Visit earthrunners.com and use Lana, Lana, at checkout for 10% off. That's earthrunners.com and Lana at checkout for 10% off. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to welcome back Dr. Rachel Harris to the podcast. She was a guest on season 1. I believe it was in April 2022. So it's been almost 2 years since we've touched base. And since then, you have actually written a new book called Swimming in the Sacred: Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lana.
Yeah, it's so nice to have you. And yeah, just like your sweet, gentle spirit with us today. So I really want to get started by just diving into your fantastic book, which I loved reading, and I encourage listeners to pick up a copy. One of the first things that stood out to me in your book was you were at a friend's house and you thought she yelled something at you, but she didn't yell it at you. And she was a healer, right? What's the correct word for her?
A shaman.
She's a shaman.
She called Connie Groud. She's not underground, so I can say her name. And she's got a bunch of books out. You can find her on Amazon, Graud. And she calls herself a shamana.
A shamana.
So she chooses the feminine.
And what was the thing that she said to you that you were certain that she yelled, but she did not?
This was so interesting. It was in a friend's kitchen. So it was 3 women, and we're spending all day together, and we're talking. And I'm a lifelong therapist. I had 40 years as a therapist. So I'm asking the usual therapy questions and asking about ayahuasca ceremonies and therapy and childhood history and these kinds of standard, the context is therapy kinds of questions. And my experience was she got right up in my face and yelled loud. And she's a strong personality. And basically said something like, it's not about therapy. It's about transformation. I backed off and kept quiet and didn't ask any more therapy questions. I was really silenced. And at the end of the afternoon, after spending the day together, Connie left and I was there with my old friend whose kitchen we were in. And I said to her, "Did Connie yell at me?" And she said, "No, she never yelled at you." I had an experience of being yelled at, but the reality check was she did not yell at me. And the way I understood this was she used her energy to shift me, and she did shift me out of the therapy questions. And this is when I really got that the underground women are not therapists, because I had made that assumption. These are therapeutic journeys, and it was not at all true. And they are really more like priestesses guiding a journey. And that interaction really shifted me. And permanently, I would say, it had a huge impact, so that I really understood the importance of the difference between a transformational experience with these medicines or even a spontaneous one and the process of therapy, that these are two different animals, basically. And therapists, I'll speak as a therapist, would do well to recognize the difference. And so it took this energetic intervention to move me. So that's really what I'm calling out.
Yeah. And what was the other thing that she said around the family history? We don't even want to know about it. We don't even care.
You don't care. And you know what? Somebody said to me, they were in Peru working with a shaman and talking about their family of origin, the usual stuff that I'm always fascinated by. And the shaman fell asleep. It's always a bad sign if a therapist falls asleep. Yeah. But that's a good indicator. They're not using family history or history of trauma as diagnostic tools. They're using what they see energetically.
Yes.
It's a whole different process.
So amazing. Yeah, I love that. And I really want to start our conversation off here because there's this difference between the healing journey and the transformation journey. And yeah, I have my own understanding of what I think that is, but I want to hear from you. What is the difference between healing and transformation, or the healing journey and the transformation journey?
I can actually tell you with an example from an email I got a week ago. And this is an old client of mine who's done a lot of breath work and all kinds of consciousness work. And she was a client of mine for a number of years. That's the past tense. Her sister was a huge problem in her life. And she had all kinds of psychiatric and medical issues. And so it was always an ongoing crisis of one sort or another. And she'd been in a nursing home, really. And it was just this sort of tragic, bad story that went from one crisis to another. And so I worked with my client on the traditional therapeutic stuff. She's a survivor in the family. The other sister isn't, obviously. She's had a life of illnesses. And so with any survivor guilt, with a sense of over-responsibility, just the burden of having a sister that required constant care, and the guilt that goes along with survivor, that she was the member of the family who survived and thrived, and the sister didn't. So that's all this complex, mucky family of origin stuff. And we did a good job of it. So she could help to take care of her sister and keep all the mixed emotions and feelings out of it, and set healthy boundaries for herself and function well, given this tragedy of a very sick sister. That was a good therapeutic outcome. Then she went and had a psilocybin journey. After that experience, she could say, my sister was a blessing, not a burden. I could not help her get there in a therapy session. We did everything else. We did all the work around it. Maybe all that therapy work helped her reach that breakthrough in the mushroom journey. Maybe she would have gotten there anyway. We don't know. But that's the difference. To be able to say, my sister is a blessing, not a burden, that's an incredible leap. And when I work with therapists or talk to therapists, I want to be very clear with them that they recognize that difference so they don't try and therapize a transformation experience. So when this is just in an email, my response is not, does that mean you don't feel guilty anymore? No, I don't go there. I go to, oh, wow, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. And it happened. That transformation happened just serendipitously. That mushroom ceremony happened just a few weeks before the sister died. So she was able to get to that place just before her sister dying.
Yeah, that's an amazing example. And in your book, you talk about this idea that, yeah, transformation is getting to a place where, yeah, you can be, yeah, grateful for all the things that happen in life. And one of the quotes I highlighted was one of your underground guides that you interviewed said, to say thank you for everything is a hard place to get to. I love that.
I know.
It's so beautiful.
I quote that all the time. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's the research studies are looking at people with certain diagnoses, and the desired outcome is to reduce the symptoms so that the person no longer qualifies for that diagnosis. So in MAPS, many of the people no longer qualify for a PTSD diagnosis, which is amazing because these are treatment-resistant subjects. That's not what these underground women are looking for. And I just want to say I had a criteria of 20 years experience for the underground women. But in fact, I found women who had 30, 40 years experience. So they're very experienced. And they look for these signs of transformation. So it's how you live your life, so that's one of the quotes I always use. But here's another one. I watch for a shift in how the person embraces being alive. That's very different from looking at a symptomatology list from the DSM-5.
Yeah. And when I think about my experiences with psychedelics, that's exactly what happened. I have embraced life in a completely different way thanks to my journeys. Like I feel like that is completely accurate. And that's such a sign of transformation. Yeah.
And then, but the thing to watch for is if you don't have enough kind of feedback in your life and reality check, some people can feel, I'm transformed. I'm going to save the world. And they can get into an inflated state. Even though I don't want therapists mucking around, asking therapy questions about a transformation, I also want people to have some reality check that they're contributing, they're bringing back from this experience and contributing to their community or doing what I call their spiritual job, whatever that is, but not an inflated, I'm going to save the world. What I do is going to make such a difference. Or now I'm ready to lead ceremonies.
Yes.
That's a common one.
Absolutely. And a lot of the women that you interviewed, I'm willing to bet really embodied that reality check. What do you think?
Yes. And there's a whole new generation of people who call themselves underground guides. And they've just appointed themselves. They've just decided that's not how these women arrived at this work. And it's not how they function. So they might look like they're working underground alone, but in fact, they are not. They have doctors and pharmacologists they consult with. They do extensive medical screenings, and then they talk to doctors about it. They have peers that they can talk to for what therapists call peer consultation, peer supervision. They talk to each other about, you need to take a break and rest. You're becoming depleted, and that's not healthy for you. So they look like they're functioning alone, but really they have a lot of collegial support. And when I was at MAPS in June, some young people would come up to me and say, I'm an underground guide. And I would ask, do you do medical screening? This one woman said, what's that? She had no clue. So there's comprehensive medical screening, and then there's having professionals that you can consult with, licensed professionals, medical doctors and pharmacists.
Yeah, it's definitely something that people want to look out for when working with underground guides or even above ground guides is a thorough medical.
Is there a complete medical screening?
Absolutely.
It's one of these concrete things. If there isn't, don't go.
Absolutely. Yeah. And on the topic of people rushing into guiding ceremonies, leading ceremonies, that sort of thing, many of the guides that you interviewed had over 2 decades of experience, right?
30, 40 years. These
30,
are
40
the
years.
real,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why they have so many gems to share with us. So, yeah, you talked in the book about, the importance of heal thyself first, doing your own work first, and how most of these women leading and guiding ceremonies was a natural progression of their own healing journey. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Was there a moment when they knew that they wanted to take on the role of guiding, or was it a natural progression? What did they have to say about that transition?
Well, each of them is different because they trained in very different ways. But there's one who was a traditionally trained Shipipo shaman, so an American, but
That's
had
pretty rare.
trained. It takes 6-7 years to begin.
Yeah.
And the shaman said to her after 6 years, "You're ready to sing in ceremony." And she said, "No, I'm not." And so she just recently described this to me, how the different apprentices, as they came of age, as they got to that 6 or 7 years, each apprentice would sit right next to the shaman and sing just a nanosecond behind the shaman. So they're almost singing together. And then they could whisper and talk about what are they seeing in the patient, what are they seeing energetically. And so when she moved up in the apprentice list and sat for a whole other year until she was ready to sing in ceremony. So and I understand that we don't have that luxury or that discipline or dedication now. People are not going to not many people are going to spend 6 or 7 years. And the therapists are licensed, they've done graduate work, and they feel they have a right to go to an online training or a week or two of ketamine training and say, "I'm a psychedelic therapist." But there's no comparison between their knowledge and what grows out of years and years of experience and training. And these women elders have experienced all the medicines in all levels of dosages. That's a lot of traveling in these other realms. So they know the territory. No, they actually know the territory and can intuit where the person is. They've been there. That's very different from maybe having a couple of MDMA sessions or a few ketamine sessions, or maybe even one mushroom session. They did their own healing using these medicines.
What would you say if someone is looking to have a psychedelic experience and they are considering going down the route of working with something like an underground guide or someone who has been traditionally trained and apprenticed under an elder, and then they're also maybe considering going through the psychedelic therapy route, like maybe a ketamine clinic or something? What would you say is the differences in approach and outcomes that one can expect from each of those?
We don't have any data really showing what the differences are. See, what I'm trying not to say is the women have done everything at all different dosages. And that's really the way to know and learn the territory. That's how to be a student of these medicines and develop a relationship with the different plant medicines, especially. And that takes years. But that's not the framework for therapists necessarily. And it's a very different orientation. And we've conflated the roles. So the psychedelic therapists in the research studies, for instance, they do prep, they do the journey, and they do the so-called integration sessions, which are just debriefing sessions mostly. Now you're conflating a guide who sits and a therapist. And the women I interviewed are guides. They're sitting. They're the priestesses who are with you and traveling with you. That's a different role than a therapist. And for some reason, we've jumped right into this and not really been clear about that distinction. These are really two different sets of skills, experiences, and trainings, and we've conflated them. And there's someone I know who qualified for a Hopkins study, I think I forget what the diagnosis was, but it was like a long-term COVID kind of diagnosis. So it wasn't a psychiatric one. And so she did the study protocol. And then I spoke to her months later, had dinner. So it's an informal setting, but intimate. And she had lots of questions about, what does this mean? What impact? This is months after the so-called integration sessions. And she talked about being very irritated that what they had her do was write out her experience, which she did. And then when she went in for an integration session, the therapist asked her to tell them her experience. And she said, well, I've already written it out. Why do I have to tell you again? That's a waste of our time together. Which, if someone said that to me in therapy, I would have to say, you're absolutely right. But no, they were following a protocol and they, no, please tell me. And so she was a little irritated with them. So they do a 6-month follow-up. So after our dinner together, and we talked about some of these existential questions that she had. When she went back to Hopkins for the follow-up, she gave the therapist my book. and it was totally different, so-called in follow-up integration session. So I think we really have to say, no matter what the background, as therapists, we don't really know what the hell we're talking about when we're talking about integration. It means so many different things. And the women, even though they're not doing therapy, they're looking at how people integrate their experience into their lives. So they're looking for how that transformation shows up in the life. And if what they begin to see is the person is only interested in another mystical experience, they don't work with them again. That's not what they're interested in. So look at how they're managing the whole thing. Even though they're not therapists, they're working at a different level. So there's a whole shift in the way they hold the medicines and hold the process for people.
These women elders in the underground, how do they tend to approach and view integration and going back to life after the experience?
They want to see behavioral changes and how the person embraces their life and whether the person has a job to do, a mission. What are they changing in their life? What are they contributing? And how do you relate to things that are difficult? Here's a good quote that contrasts the research infatuation with mystical experience as, you get a mystical experience, but so what? You have to learn how to work with energy. If you don't shift your awareness, you'll never know how energy works. That's a whole different way of looking at how integration unfolds. And in the underground world, people use these entheogens in a very different way. So people tend to maybe do a couple of sessions over a 6-month period, and then maybe once a year. Albert Hofmann, the chemist who discovered LSD-25, evidently he did an LSD session once a year till he was like 97 years old, and that was his last LSD session, and then he died at 102. That's a whole different way of looking at these medicines than trying to reduce symptomatology. But I have to say, as a researcher, we need that data. They've chosen people with diagnoses who have suffered for decades. These are very simpatico people who are facing terminal cancer diagnoses. We want the medicines to be able to help them. So these are also very important processes and two different ways of holding the medicines. And as a culture, we're very young working with these medicines. I'm hoping we can develop an attitude of learning. I hope we have the humility to say we don't know what the hell we're doing. We need to learn. And then there'll be a whole array of ways of working with the medicines and of holding them. One of the underground women said, even if these medicines become legal, I would continue to work underground because that's where the sacred container is. Mm. So there are real differences.
Yeah. And that brings such a smile to my face because, I'm such a believer in the underground and just in every way, not just with medicine, but the underground is where the magic happens and also where some of the most unethical stuff happens. But I totally agree with that. That is where the sacredness
stuff
is.
Happens in the
exactly.
Research studies. Come on, yes. We've all seen that horrible video. Yeah, so there's no escaping inflation and abuse. It's possible anywhere.
Absolutely. So here's my not so secret. The number one tool in my toolkit, the thing that has changed my life for the better the most, aside from psychedelics, of course, is not therapy. It's not breath work. It's not meditation. It's not even the yoga I've been doing for 15 years. It's coaching. because coaching is the most actionable tool that I have come across. A few years ago, I fired my therapist and hired a coach, and working with a coach helped me start moving in the direction I wanted to move. And I finally stopped feeling stuck. I fell so in love with coaching, even though I wanted to become a therapist at that time. I decided instead to get trained and certified as a professional coach. As a psychedelics informed life coach, I work with people who are on the psychedelic path, which is probably you if you're listening to this podcast. The Global Coaching Client Study from the International Coaching Federation shows most clients who work with a professional coach report improved work performance, more growth and opportunities, greater self-confidence, enhanced relationships, more effective communication skills, better work and life balance, and an improvement in wellness. According to the same study, 99% of people who were polled said that they were somewhat or very satisfied with the overall coaching experience. Coaching works. I see similar results amongst my clients every week. You can actually read their beautiful in-depth testimonials on my website at modernpsychedelics.net. Along with being psychedelics informed, my style is process oriented. We live in this outcome obsessed world where our default mode is to live life for the destination or the end result. But I have come to understand that the gifts are actually in the journey, and that's where we grow and learn and enjoy life the most. So that's why I equip my clients with tools and skills for the long game of life and the long game of medicine work. I'm currently onboarding new one-on-one clients into my coaching practice. So if this sounds like it would be supportive for where you're at, get in touch with me. I would love to hear from you. And you can click on the link in the show notes or head to modernpsychedelics.net/coaching. There's lots of info there for you along with those testimonials. I can't wait to connect with you. That's modernpsychedelics.net/coaching. Okay, let's go back to the episode. One of the things I really related to in your book that a lot of the guides kept saying was that this is a path. This is a lifelong process. This is a journey. This is a way of life. This is the way that I live my life. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and how they see, the plants, the medicines as a lifelong path and journey rather than, just this thing that you do to reduce symptoms and then you're done with it?
Yeah, well, I felt that the women underground guides had more intimate relationships with the plant spirits. And the book I recommend, because this is a different way of holding the medicines than the therapeutic one, is Jeremy Narby's Plant Teachers. And he talks about ayahuasca, tobacco, and something else, which I can't remember, but it's called Plant Teachers. It's a small book. It's really a valuable book. It's mostly a recorded conversation with what does he call him? He doesn't call him a shaman. I think he calls him a curandero. But he really talks beautifully about the relationship with the plant spirits. And this is, if you've done one or two journeys and you're a therapist, you don't have a relationship. It needs to build over many journeys and experiences and dietas and working with the plants. And so that's a different process in itself. It's really like a school that's learning, where the student is learning. And here's an example of what a life looks like for one of the guides. I spent the afternoon with her, and then it began to move into sunset, and I was going to drive home. And she said, she pulls out a bucket and she says, I'm going to drink this. And it's a bucket of ayahuasca. This is a Western woman. And she's not doing a ceremony with other people. And I'm like, why do you want to do that? And she said, this is a new batch. I've never tasted it before. I'm going to serve it tomorrow night in a ceremony. I have to know what I'm serving. Every batch is different. Every plant is different. I have to know what this particular mixture is like. So this is how I'm going to spend my night. And I'm like, bon voyage, I'm out of here. And so that's part of her life. That's part of what people don't see if they go to a ceremony with her and she's traditionally trained. They don't know that this is her dedication in life and this is what her life looks like. And it's really years and years of working with the plant. So it's a whole different process.
Yeah, I imagine that their lives revolve around their work and that it takes a great deal of commitment, dedication, sacrifice. Yeah. Yeah, so it is all encompassing. Like it is a huge part of their life.
It is all encompassing. So I'm traveling. I happen to be in Santa Cruz right now, and a friend who was one of the women I interviewed, she'd been a longtime friend anyway, and she's traditionally trained, and she was guiding people on a dieta, and so she felt she should accompany them on the dieta. So this is a month-long, very restricted diet, no salt, no sugar, no eating out, no eating food that you don't prepare yourself. She says she's doing a modified version of this in the Western world, but she lived with me for 3 days. I know how strict it was. We couldn't go to a restaurant. She ate very little. And it was just an extremely restricted diet. And this is how she was supporting her students by joining them on this dieta. And if I saw her cut up another banana and put almond butter on it, I think I would shoot myself. That's all she ate some days almost. And salads with no salad dressing and very little. There is absolutely real sacrifice and discipline involved.
Yeah, and I would imagine with relationships as well, and just like free time and how they spend their lives. So yeah, that's an important note for people out there considering guiding.
Alone. They didn't. Some had children, but many didn't. More than most. If you look at what percentage of women have children, this was an unusual number who did not have children. They really dedicated their lives to this process.
Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. And you talk about the relationship that they have to the plants. You've mentioned it a few times, and you talk about the subtle realms a lot in your book. Can you tell us a little bit about that, these subtle realms?
Here's the most interesting thing about these women is I think they're very flexible in their state of consciousness. So they move very easily across realms. And my hypothesis is that they were like this before they started with the medicines. They reported a number of very unusual childhood spiritual experiences and unusual dreams. And so they already were shifting across expanded states of consciousness, even before they became adults and found their way to the medicines. And I think this was part of their, a preparation for something they didn't realize. It was just happening in their lives, and part of their calling is the best way I can put it. They had unusual dreams, unusual spontaneous experiences. And then when they came upon the medicines, it was like, oh yes, this is it. So they have kind of fluidity across states. And in psychological terms, the variable is called absorption. It's an absorption factor in personality. And there's a paper and pencil scale that measures it, and it determines how easily you can be hypnotized, how easily you can shift states of consciousness. And one of the questions is, remember when we went to movie theaters years ago, if you forget you're in a movie theater and you're in the movie, that's a shift. Then you're in a trance. And how easily that happens is a function of absorption. And there's a range. Some people shift easily and some people don't. And these women shifted very easily. So lots of times, just in conversation, I could see them getting a little dreamy. And because I shift easily, I would get a little altered also. And there were times after a day spent with someone where I realized I was driving home and I should not be driving. And there was one where I stopped at a gas station to medicate with peanut M&Ms. I needed something grounding. I needed sugar. It wasn't that I was hungry. I just needed to shift my consciousness so I could drive the rest of the way home. And sugar and the protein in the peanuts helped me. But I didn't realize it till I was in my car for a half a mile. I thought, oh no, this is not okay. I'm going to get on an expressway on a highway. No. There's this altered state. There was another one where I spent 12 hours with 2 Native Americans. And at the end of the day, it's 9:00 at night. And they just very sweetly say to me, do you want to use the bathroom before do you need to use the bathroom before you go? And I said, I don't know. I don't know if I need to pee or not. Now, that's a crazy statement. So they immediately knew they had to do energetic work on me so I could safely drive home. And that's what they did. What's so interesting about that is most of that 12-hour time, we had lunch and then we went out for dinner. But most of that 12-hour time was spent around the dining room table talking, and I'm taking notes. And there was a door in the dining room off to the side that I didn't even notice. So once they diagnosed that I was in an altered state and they didn't want to let me get in my car, I came out of the bathroom. I did need to pee. I didn't even know it. Come out of the bathroom and they take me back into the dining room where I had sat for all those hours. And through that door I hadn't noticed. And it's their ceremonial room with all their sacred objects and feathers and rattles and shakers and all kinds of things. I would have had no clue about that if I hadn't shifted consciousness. I could have missed that completely in my interview process. This is really a lesson for interviewers. I don't know how we maybe look around better than I did and say, where does that door go? But that might not have gotten me into the ceremony room. It was that I could shift into an expanded state that they took me in, and then they did energy work all around me with herbs and feathers and for quite a while. And then I drove an hour home.
What an experience to have spent time with these human beings and to be in their presence and to get to know them. Wow.
I'm very grateful for the impact that this experience had on me.
Yeah.
And I have a running teasing with Joe Tafur, the Fellowship of the River, because he's the Shipipo trained shaman. So he's seeing things in energy fields and he's working with spirits and he's done dietas and has plant allies and he's really embedded in that whole world. And I'm the visitor and he's always trying to nudge me more into that world. So he's watching my progress of leaving a more scientific Western cosmology and moving into really believing my own experience with plant spirit. Believing I have the experience, but really believing it.
I think you can really see that shift in you from your book, Listening to Ayahuasca, to this one, that shift from the, because that book was quite scientific and research-based.
I'm slow, but I'm making progress.
You are. It's beautiful.
And there's a shift out of a linear time reality. So it was really interesting. I didn't ask to record these women because they are so secret. They've never talked to anybody. I just didn't have the chutzpah, I don't know if you know that word, to ask them if I could record. I just thought it was not respectful. So I took extensive notes. And sometimes they would jump around in their stories about their lives. And I would get a little lost. What happened when and where? And it's because they're not as tied to a linear sense of time as I am. If you asked me about my life, I would give a chronological summary. That's not how they did it. They went from experience to back again to I had a dream and then it came out in a vision quest 30 years later. It was just, and it's because they're not tied to that linear time zone. And that's part of that shift. That's part of breaking out of our Western conditioning. And I grew up in not a religious family. And I would have thought, oh, I'm not conditioned in these Western ways. But yes, I am. And so it's been a process of breaking out of that slowly.
I think your past paradigm, right, if we want to call it that, from the scientific therapeutic world, gives your current body of work a lot more to stand on, and it almost makes you more creditable because you are making that shift and we're watching it and we're learning it along with you because you've been in both sides. Yeah. So I think that's what's so fascinating about you.
And I'm not losing one. I'm not only living in the land of spirits.
Right.
I have not moved to the jungle. Far from it. It's my own flexibility moving between those worlds that I think is being curated by these experiences.
Yeah, and I forget, it might have been Anne Schulgen in your book that was quoted in saying that transformation is embracing all of it, the shadow and the light and all parts. And
it's really focused on the shadow.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, it really is just such a treasure that you had an opportunity in writing this book to sit with and learn from and go into the world of so many fascinating women doing such beautiful work in the world. What would you say how many women did you interview?
There were 15 where I did really in-depth interviews where I went back to them in person again and again, spent weekends with them.
Wow.
Still in touch with them. Made phone calls to ask questions. What did you mean by? So it was ongoing. This is qualitative research. It's not statistical. But usually there's an interview schedule where you ask the same questions. I didn't do that.
Yeah.
And I consciously chose not to do that, although that would have been the appropriate research thing to do. I wanted the women to go wherever they wanted to go. I wanted to follow them with whatever they wanted to talk about, what was important to them in their lives. And I spent much more time with them. Research interviews might be an hour or two long. I spent days with many of these women.
Yeah.
And so these were not therapy sessions, but they involve that kind of intimate sharing.
Yeah, it's amazing. So when you look at this group of 15 women or so that you spend time with, what would you say are some of the common traits that they all have, or that most of them have, that really do make them amazing guides?
They're afraid of nothing. They've traveled and been in all kinds of entheogenic travel and all kinds of worlds, all kinds of situations. And yeah, they're afraid of nothing. And I can tell you, I'm pretty much afraid of everything. So I share a lot in common with these women. I was living in California in the 60s. I was around many of the same people who trained them. I did not go that way because I'm not of their ilk. They are spiritual warriors. I went to graduate school. You don't have to be a spiritual warrior to go to graduate school. As a matter of fact, you're better off if you're not. So these women from childhood, and I met a new person who was not part of this book, and she wouldn't have qualified because she's only been working underground for, I think, 4 years or so. But she's done a lot of trainings. And so she taught. Again, it was not an interview. We were just having coffee together. But she talked about her life, and there were so many early experiences in her life that kind of braid into working with these medicines. And my life did not look like that. I was writing papers for college. It just did not. She had these unusual experiences. I think it was 20 years ago she did one of those dark meditation retreats in total darkness.
Oh, yeah.
Before anybody talked about them. 20 years ago, who was doing them? And I think it was a week-long one. It wasn't a day or 3 days. It's like, how did you even know to do that? Why in the world did you? But that is part of what informs her work with the entheogens now. So this is a whole other life path. And this is not atypical of what these women are like that I interviewed. She's just at the beginning. She was a decade or two younger. She doesn't have the 20 years that were my criteria, so she wouldn't have qualified. But the stories of her life were very much the same. And I'm like, where should I apply to college? It's just completely different.
Yeah. What about being afraid of nothing makes these women such great guides?
How do you do these medicines at all different dosages? I asked one of the women, because I have a special interest in the way the European psychiatric community has worked with these medicines, and they've used them in a psycholytic way. Do you even know that term? You've heard that term.
Psycholytic, yes. It was the first kind of framework that they used when studying psychedelics.
It was low dose, not a microdose, an experienced dose, but held within a therapeutic process. So someone might have a lightly dosed journey with the therapist and then come to therapy twice a week for a month. And then the second month, another lightly dosed journey. So the journeys are really an integral part of the therapeutic process. As a therapist, this appeals to me. It's a very different framework than the mystical of 1 or 2 higher doses, and the mystical experience solves everything. That's a very crude approach so far. But it's Johns Hopkins, and it's yielded great data, but we're still learning. So I asked one of the women, and of course these women are now in their 70s. If they've been working 30 or 40 years, they're older. And she said, yeah, I tend to like lighter doses these days. And I'm feeling like, yeah, me too. And then she says, but sometimes I just like to fly. There's the difference. I don't like to fly. I don't like one of those big doses. No, thank you. But she's still game for it.
Yeah.
So not all the time.
Probably comfortable
like
for her.
She did when she was in her 20s and 30s. Yeah. That's a different attitude. That's a different capacity.
Totally. And were most of these women working with, I would assume, mushrooms and ayahuasca, or were any working with iboga or 5-MeO-DMT?
Everything. They covered the water.
Okay.
Everything. This is not a how-to book. So I
Okay.
didn't ask about what dosages, how are you doing it,
Yeah.
or the most rude question, where do you get your medicines? I didn't go there. This is not a how-to book. This is
No.
more of a philosophical book about what it takes in the person's being to have the presence to sit there and be with someone and intuit into their psychedelic experience as they're having it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a very esoteric skill.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not doing a how-to book. There are some
Yeah.
of those out there.
No, you
So
certainly were not.
I didn't ask what medicines did you use and what order and
Okay.
what way. I didn't ask any of that. I was not interested in that. I wanted to know, how did they in their own lives develop the capacity to do this sacred work?
Yeah.
Because I
Okay.
think they are they are the most experienced in the Western world at this point. And they model a way of holding these medicines in a sacred way. And we need to learn from them. And they're
Mm-hmm.
not standing up at conferences speaking. And the research teams have not contacted them. And they would be able to, but they have not chosen to do that. These women don't have higher degrees mostly. And that's a mistake that the research teams have made.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's totally a different ballgame, the research and the underground. And I think that your book is such an important piece of literature to bring this information that we really do need in the psychedelic space right now. It could not have come at a better time. What did you learn about this? Yeah, being aware of, you mentioned the ego inflation that can happen often at the beginning of our interview. So what did you learn about how to, just be aware of that and be cautious of that?
That's part of doing your own work so that you don't fall into that countertransference and act out from inflation and abuse people, which is already happening. But it was Laura Huxley and Anne Shulgin. The quotes came out. There was a theme of, don't get in between the person and the medicine. Keep your own stuff out of it. And Stan Groff talks about this in an analytical countertransference kind of way in his book LSD Psychotherapy. And it is the traditional have your own analysis before you become a psychoanalyst, basically. But he goes a step further. And he says that when someone is under the influence of an entheogen, they become almost psychic in being able to suss out the guide's unfinished business. So you can't hide anything. If you've got your own issues coming up as you're guiding a session, your client is going to feel that. So that's even a further statement than just countertransference issues coming up. And Anne is very clear about do your own shadow work, keep it out of the way. And that is not happening, Jenna. I mean, that's not part of the training. You can become a therapist without a licensed therapist without ever having been in therapy. If someone's looking for a therapist, you have a right to ask them, have you had your own therapy? And if they have not, don't go to them.
How important do you think it is to take one's time and to not rush into it when it comes to, limiting the ego inflation and the potential harms?
You did a wonderful interview with Jules Evans. I listened to it this morning before our time together.
Thank you.
He's brilliant talking about risks and that the psychedelic community is not talking enough about risks. But among the elders in the community who I interviewed, not just the women, but lots of people, men and people who'd been in this realm for all their lives, really, 40, 50 years, everyone knows someone who's permanently harmed. Never been the same. So yes, it's a very small percentage. For the most part, these medicines are very safe and they're not totally safe. So there's always some risk. So you want to be in the safest situation possible.
Yeah.
And I looked at it's on your website, and you list some retreat centers and you list the number of people in the ceremony. You don't list the number of helpers or the number of shamans, but you have a right to ask those, how many people will be in the ceremony? How many helpers do you have? Is there one shaman or a few shamans? And in terms of going to some of the retreat centers in Peru or even Costa Rica, you want to know how that retreat center is treating the shaman they import, because some of them have rules. You have 7 minutes to sing to each person. I would not go to a retreat center who restricted a shaman's work that way. Or you're not allowed to speak directly to the participants outside of the ceremony. I would not go to and that's not going to be in their description. You have to hear about this. So you want to know how the shaman are being treated.
Yeah, thank you for that. And last question, I'm sure many people listening want to embark on the journey of becoming a guide or a facilitator. So what words of wisdom do you have for people who are considering that?
I have a request. Please don't write to me and ask me how you can connect with these women I interviewed. I don't know what people don't get about they're anonymous. I am not handing out their phone numbers, so don't ask for them. I know it's not easy, but some people find their way to really experienced guides. And so it's a little bit like when you're ready, the teacher will appear. Keep looking. I tell people, go to your local psychedelic society meetings, network, but take your time and be very careful. And I also refer people to what used to be called the Women's Visionary Congress. Now I think it's called Visionary Congress. These are really experienced people, and they're very supportive of women, and they do conferences. And there's a lot of information on their website. So these are places to connect, to find experienced people. So look, this is part of the path.
Sounds like what you're saying is take your time.
And you know what? I didn't put this in the book, but one of the elders said to me, people should ask someone before they go to a ceremony with them. And I thought it was too aggressive a question, but now I think it's a needed question. I'm sorry I didn't include it in the book. But the question is, who authorized you to serve this medicine? In other words, what's your lineage? And if they say, I did a bunch of ceremonies and I prefer working with someone who has a real lineage.
Yeah. And of course, there's some medicines that don't have a lineage, but for the ones that do, absolutely. That's absolutely important.
So there's a choice involved, and you have a right to ask questions.
Anything else that you want to share before I let you go? Anything that is just burning inside of you to share?
No. Well, I think we need to know more about what do the work means. This was the theme, that these women did their work, they worked on their shadow, and how you do that work with entheogens and what that looks like. And it's a combination of journeys and psychotherapy and spiritual work and how that all comes together. Yeah. And I think we need more models for that. We need to know more about what that looks like. It looks very different in everybody's life, but it's a very different, much bigger concept of integration than a few follow-up sessions.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And for everyone listening, Swimming in the Sacred, Wisdom from the Psychedelic Underground. This is one of the most important books on psychedelics that I have read. I think it's absolutely necessary to pick this up and read the stories and the wisdom in here. And Dr. Rachel Harris is kind enough to offer our listeners a copy of her book. So you definitely want to enter that. I'll be doing a giveaway on Instagram, and we'll hold it open for a week after this episode airs. So I'll link that in the show notes for you guys to enter and check it out. And Rachel, where can people find you or get in touch with you? Not to ask you to get connected to the guides, but if they want to connect with you about something else.
You can put the website on on the internet. It's swimminginthesacred.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for writing this book. I know it's been a journey. We talked about it 2 years ago when I interviewed you. So it's been a journey.
Oh, I do remember that. You're right.
Yes. So I know it's been a journey. Thank you so much for writing this and for being open and flexible to evolving and growing in these ways.
Thank you, Lana. Thank you.
Yeah. Amazing. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to and supporting the show. To stay in touch, sign up for my mailing list, which can be found in the show notes or on modernpsychedelics.net. If this episode sparked something within, please let me know by leaving a review of the Modern Psychedelics podcast on Apple and Spotify. This really helps to share these messages with those who need them, which is the whole reason why I do what I do. And if you haven't already, come join the ongoing conversation over on Instagram with other beautiful souls. We have an incredible and conscious community over at the handle Modern Psychedelics. And don't forget that the work begins after you come back down to earth. And I'm standing shoulder to shoulder, doing it with you. This episode is produced in collaboration with Film with Integrity. They are a values-forward production studio providing end-to-end production from concept to content. They do event video, documentary series, commercial and marketing videos, and of course, podcast production. If you are working on a project that deserves quality of production and content without sacrificing heart and soul, visit filmwithintegrity.com to check out their beautiful work and get in touch with their team.